Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Welcome to today's episode. We're talking about timeless interiors, a design concept that can feel slightly intimidating, almost like something reserved for architects or heritage homes or interiors that somehow never age. But I actually think timelessness is far more approachable than that. Timeless design is not about freezing your home in one aesthetic moment. It's not about avoiding trends altogether or creating something so neutral that nothing can ever date. It's about understanding what actually lasts, what continues to feel good, what continues to function well, and what continues to hold meaning. And if your home is meant to support better living, which is something we talk about often here, then that matters, because a home that constantly asks to be replaced, refreshed, or emotionally disconnected from is a very different experience from a home that evolves with you. So in this episode, I'll explore what timeless interiors actually are, why some spaces feel permanent in the best possible way, what the opposite of timeless looks like, and of course, practical ways to create that feeling in your own home. So this really isn't about chasing some perfect timeless interior. It's about shedding light on why certain things continue to resonate and recognizing that timelessness is something that we're already far more familiar with than we realize. I mean, we live in a culture that constantly tells us to replace, refresh, update, and change things. And interiors have really started moving at that same speed as things like fast fashion. But some spaces feel different, right? Some homes feel settled. They feel layered and certain, like they've been shaped more slowly and intentionally over time. And those are often the spaces that we remember the most. Not just because they look beautiful, they look stylish, all of those things, but because of how they actually make us feel when we're in them. Maybe more calmer, more present, more connected, and maybe more reflected of who we are and how we want to live. Maybe we feel more inspired when we're in them, which raises an interesting question. If most design details eventually date themselves, what actually stands the test of time? Because I don't think timeless interiors are about avoiding change or not embracing, updating, and evolving. I think they're more about creating spaces with enough depth and quality and meaning and flexibility that they can evolve beautifully instead of constantly being erased. Spaces that support better living, not because they're perfect, but because they create a stronger sense of connection, of permanence, and care in our everyday life. And that's what I want to explore really in this episode. So when we look at timeless things in general, it's often a result of cultural shift, like the impact that something had in the time that it came about. It had a profound impact on the way people thought. It changed the trajectory of where things were headed. It gave hope and promise. There was excitement in the newness of it. And it was evolution in the sense that it made things evolve from where they were to where they were going. You know, maybe it had never been done before. So when we say timeless, we're really talking about impact. How much impact does something have in order to stand the test of time? Now, it's rare for something nowadays to be so new that it's never been done. There might be a new take on it, but arguably it's hard in today's day and age for things to be so new. New things are often informed by old things, by the past. So timeless means that it's so good that even time doesn't change its impact and its meaning. Time doesn't cause one to fall out of love with it or lose appreciation for it. It doesn't strip away the permanence. It's like Mark Twain or the Mona Lisa. It's like the Sagrada Familia. And you may not say, my goal is to create timeless interiors. That may not be what you're actually striving for, but I want to share that timeless is something that we are all very much aware of in our day-to-day life, in things that we interact with and things we know of. If you think about certain brands or objects like the little blue box from Tiffany, you know it right now. You see it in your mind when I say it. The Rolex watch, Levi's 501 jeans, or maybe a trench coat, even a white Oxford shirt, Persian rug. And then there's things like timeless places, like old streets in Paris with history and patina, brownstone architecture in New York, English country cottages that are storied and aged, and then there's people like Audrey Hepburn, who is simple but elegant, or Ralph Lauren, which is just a strong visual story in its brand. Princess Diana, her looks today are still relevant. So timeless is also things like your favorite song that you've loved for over 20 years, or your grandmother's dining table that you still have and everyone gathers around, a beautiful bound book, or tactile things like real wood floors and, fresh flowers in a simple vase. So what does it come down to at the core of timelessness? Well, things like quality, craftsmanship, things that are made well, endure, materials, construction, the attention to detail, consistency, not chasing every shift. So things like the Tiffany blue, Ralph Lauren, the trench coat, it's just a consistent feeling over time. Confidence is restraint, not trying too hard, self-control. So you're not trying this and then trying that. Timeless things tend to feel self-assured. And then there's emotional connection and meaning. And this is big for interiors, for our homes, because objects that we love deeply often outlive trends because meaning extends their life. So if they're connected to history, to culture, to craftsmanship and memory. And then simplicity and clarity, which doesn't necessarily mean minimal. It's just clear. It's cohesive. It's understandable. So too many competing ideas can date a space quickly. And then there's things like proportion and balance. And this is huge in design, but good proportions tend to transcend trends because they just feel right. You can feel when a space is proportionate and when it's balanced. And then there's adaptability. Timeless things can evolve. A built-in, for instance, can be restained or painted, or a sofa, an antique or classic sofa, can be reupholstered. And then there's patina. So the ability to really age well. Some things just become more beautiful with time and with use. So leather, brass, old wood, vintage rugs, and even stone. Timeless interiors aren't trend proof. They're built on choices with enough quality, meaning, balance, and adaptability to really remain relevant as life evolves. And that's important because as you evolve in your life, so does your home. Right? A timeless home is usually a home that can evolve well over time. Rooms that need an overhaul, say every 5 or so years, usually weren't designed and built with permanence in mind. The choices weren't made on, how is this going to last or age or fit down the road? Whereas if you're making choices for permanence, things like going with solid wood cabinetry, which down the road can be restained or even painted. Antique furniture or vintage furniture that can be moved to another room and repurposed. And so the use can change. Things like natural stone, which often gets better with time, and good layouts, they keep working over time. When a room is created with permanence, it's noticeable. And permanence, it can be felt, right? It can be sensed. Permanence is often connected to quality. So you can really feel when something has been made well. And there's often an unspoken kind of trust and emotion that's attached to something of good quality. You know it is well built, therefore you can rely that it, on the fact that it will last longer. If something's well built, you might have saved your money and spent more of your budget on it. So it carries more value for you. And when you spent more because you're, buying better quality, you give it extra love. You give it added care. If it's a sofa, or you keep the dog off. When the kids are making their crafts, you make sure it's not on that table. You might wash it more, or you want it to stand out. So there's that added care. And permanence is sensed, it's felt in that way, but it's also felt physically because it's better materials. So it could be heavier in weight. It might have a level of detail and craftsmanship that indicates there was time and thought that went into it, that it was made by hand, and that all the details, materials, and design has been considered. So when we look at timeless interiors, you can really feel that the space has been considered. You can sense that there's been the time and the thought that's gone into it. There's a level of detail that you can see. It feels very intentional. It feels balanced and spatially organized. There's cohesion and texture. The lighting makes you feel good. And you see it in rooms with soul. Soulful interiors, they feel lived in. They carry a story, incorporating old or linked to a memory. You see it in rooms that say something. So they make a statement in some way. Maybe it's whimsical or it's sophisticated, or there's impact with scale, like an oversized pendant light. You see it in spaces with restraint and confidence. There can be a refined look to some timeless interiors, and there's noticeable confidence in the choices. So let's say you went with a brushed, forged metal light fixture, and there's detail to it that just elevates it. You see it in spaces that are collected versus purchased all at once. So interior designers, we do this with projects, especially if it's a project from the ground up and everything is new, more or less. We aim to kind of ground it and let it speak to a story. So we might incorporate some of the client's past objects, things that they're moving into the new space. We might let those inform the design decisions. So you're seeing that woven through. It could be that we do a deep dive with the client in terms of where they've traveled, places they've visited, or even past homes. Sometimes there's elements and details to past living spaces that they want to bring into this new experience. So we mirror all of that, or we weave that in to really ground the space, to kind of take away some of the newness, if you will. So there's a mix, right? The mixing that happens, which is the old and the new, the refined and the raw, even the high and the low. So in terms of how much you're spending, sentimental, elevated, right? Like your grandma's dining table. A timeless room has a mix. It's layered with various design elements. It doesn't feel like it's just appeared in this way. It feels like it's evolved, it's storied. The intention of timelessness is felt, it's experienced, it's almost palpable. Timeless interiors usually contain evidence of living. There's evidence of life. It doesn't look like a show home. It looks well loved. If you think of patina, right? Designers love patina. And you can't get true patina without time. The design must also reflect your values. So if your values, your personal values, are serving others, like family and friends, The design has to be welcoming and relaxed. If your values are sustainability, you're going to source more local, and there's probably extra attention to what something is made from. If your value is mastery, like learning and painting and playing music or reading, then, a library or an analog room or corner. If it's health, you're going to focus more on the colors that really speak to that and the connection to nature and art. If it's hard work, the design is going to be more systematic to keep you on task and efficient. So going to your values, and trusting yourself in that, because I don't think values, if they're true to you, are fleeting. So you have to look to that, because these are the things that really create a timeless space. And the opposite of timeless would be things like impulse buying, rooms that are heavily informed or even copied from Pinterest or social media. So when you've gone too far down trying to emulate what you're seeing, things like disposable furniture, so things that don't last and stand the test of time, poor craftsmanship, which it ties into the disposable furniture, buying quickly instead of thoughtfully. So again, impulse buying. And if you're familiar with fast fashion, which is low cost, high volume, and trendy, there's a whole industry that's similar for homewares. We're just buying more now for our homes than past generations ever did. So the amount of consumption has really gone up significantly. So trend-heavy interiors require constant replacement, because the trend is no longer trendy and it was just never built to last. Like fast fashion, right? There was compromise on quality, on craftsmanship, not only the time it took to manufacture it, but the time that went into thinking about the design. So a lot of fast fashion is really just copying what's out there and doing it in a much, much lesser quality and cheaper way. And it's no different than the furnishing industry, because there's often replicas done of the real thing. When you hear people who say, they've taken the time to design this or that, and then it's just duped somewhere. So fast interiors go against using your home as a tool for better living, because you're more disconnected from your space than you are connected. Now, of course, I have talked about doing the high and the low. And in some cases where you want to put the emphasis on quality, but you can't do it for everything, that's where you have to maybe make some concessions and say, I'm going to get this side table just that's cheap and cheerful that I know is not going to stand the test of time for the sake of the budget, so that I can save and buy that one piece that is going to be of good quality and really good design that's going to be timeless. So if we're designing with our values in mind, if we're purchasing for craft and story, for beauty, this has an impact on how we live. The sense of belonging. If we see parts of our life and the things that mean something to us reflected back, our objects are not just objects, they're a part of us. We actually view our objects as an extension of ourselves. Our things and what we choose have significant impact and meaning. They make a home essentially feel like a home. I remember years ago, many, many years ago, my mom sold our family home. And like anyone who's lived somewhere for a long time, raised a family there, hosted a million dinners there, has gone through life there, it's hard to say goodbye. And I told her when she sold, because she was worried, like, how are you going to feel in this new home of mine? And I told her, your home is where you go. It's the belongings, it's how you create it that makes it feel like home. So even though she moved and she sold the house, and of course her new home, it felt really different to me. The building wasn't the same. It didn't carry the same nostalgia. But what she created was familiar, because it still felt like her, there was still a sense of familiarity to it. And I think that comes from the person. If their home reflects who they are, what they value, and what they love, and there's a dance that has to happen because, of course, not all objects carry a story and carry importance and meaning. Some things are there simply to tie it all together, to look good, to add to the layering of a room, to emphasize and create rhythm. But if the story starts with the person and their values and the things that they cherish, then it will always come through in the mix that I mentioned earlier. It will always show in the high and the low, in the old, in the new, in the refined and the raw. Okay, so here are 5 principles that you can actually use if you want your home to feel more timeless. Not in a rigid, kind of intimidating way, but just in a way that creates more permanence and more meaning and, frankly, better living. Okay, so the first one is to prioritize quality where it matters. Not everything in a home needs to be expensive, but some things absolutely benefit from permanence. Okay, so a quality sofa where over time you can reupholster it. And so what's inside the sofa is great. The design of the sofa is great. A dining table is something that when it's made of good quality, it just ages beautifully over time. Like you've seen those antique dining tables that are hundreds of years old and that are still sought after today, right? Things like cabinetry, well-built cabinetry is felt, built-ins. I mentioned those earlier, but built-ins are something that add such a wonderful architectural element to a space, immediately grounds a room and gives it presence. Built-ins are something that you can stain a different color or paint them out if you need to down the road. Things like hardware, so your door handles or even just your cabinet hardware, lighting, beautiful, intricate, or even just lighting that has presence. So the detail and the quality of the lighting is there. Rugs especially are wonderful to prioritize quality. If you do a wool rug, they're hypoallergenic. They're going to last over time. These are the pieces that ground a space, and grounding creates permanence because quality ages differently. So solid wood can be refinished. Brass develops a patina. Natural stone gains character. Things like leather softens. Linen can relax beautifully over time. And as I mentioned, wool lasts. So good materials often become more beautiful through use. And there's something psychological that happens too. When something's made well, we treat it differently, we care for it differently, and we respect it. And that changes our relationship with our homes when we're taking care of the spaces that we live in. When you take care of things, you place things differently, you move things differently, you engage with things differently. Number 2 is buy slower. And this is where timeless interiors become a little more relaxed. Buying slower doesn't mean that you're second guessing every purchase. It just means that you're creating clarity so that when the right thing comes along, you know it. It just means you're buying better. And I always think planning helps here. So if you have a list, knowing what your room actually needs, knowing what you want to change, or just simply knowing what you're hunting for. For me right now, I'm in the middle of planning a gallery wall, and I'm on the slow hunt for some vintage and antique frames to contrast some of the new frames that I already have. And I could totally rush out tomorrow and buy frames from a store that look old. Like I could absolutely do that. But I want the real thing, right? I want old metal with patina that you can't fake. I want old wood with dings that tell a story. So I have my list of frame sizes, and now I get to collect. And that's the difference. I've planned what I need I've planned the orientation. I've noted what I'm looking for, the variation, the frame sizes. And so that when I'm out, I can collect things. I can go back to my list to make sure that I'm buying what I need. Because when you know what you need, shopping becomes intentional, right? It's not reactive. There's no standing around in the store holding something up and wondering, is this right? I don't know. I've done that. You already know. And when you finally find the right thing, there's just that satisfaction. Maybe there's a story attached to it. Maybe you found it while you're thrifting with a friend. Maybe you met the artisan. Maybe it's a piece that you waited and saved for. Timeless interiors often come as a result of patience. And number 3 is to mix time periods. Rooms that are entirely from one era often feel staged or overdone. So timeless rooms usually have contrast, right? I've already talked about this, but mixing that old and the new, the high and the low, the sentimental with the elevated. That mix is really what creates resilience, because contrast keeps a room from becoming locked into just one time, one moment. So like a handmade ceramic beside a contemporary lamp, your grandma's dining table with modern chairs, an antique chest in like a very clean modern room, right? That tension creates depth, and depth can create that sense of longevity. Number 4 is to focus on the layout before decoration. Good use of space is timeless. So if we think of like Buckingham Palace, there are rooms where certain pieces of furniture have sat in roughly the same position for generations because the architecture calls for it, but also because the arrangement works. A large hearth naturally draws seating around it. The way you enter a room influences where the conversation happens and how people move through the space and what the room asks of you. So I use a palace as an example, not because I think that our home should mimic that level of grandeur, but because it illustrates something important. Enduring layouts are often rooted in function. Tradition and heritage, of course, they play a role, but so does practicality, right? So a well-resolved layout really does dictate how a space functions and what that space requires. And that's no different in our homes as well, because layout is never just about where certain pieces go, like where does your sofa go? It's really shaped by place, by lifestyle, and by behavior. Where you live in the world geographically can influence how a room is arranged. How you use the room matters too. Is it hard wearing and lived in, or more precious and formal? That immediately changes the furniture choices, the circulation, and the feel of the space. So if a room is more formal, movement becomes more intentional, right? Like, how do people gather? Do guests keep their shoes on? Are you hosting a catered dinner where people circulate with drinks? Or are you creating the kind of home where everyone piles in on a Sunday afternoon and kind of settles in for hours? Now, that style of living, not visually but functionally, should shape the layout. The most timeless spaces are often the ones where the layout feels so right and considered that it just continues to work. Number 5 is to let your home reflect you. Okay, this may be one of the most important ones because timelessness is not just aesthetic, right? It's emotional. So a deeply personal room lasts longer because meaning is imprinted into things. It's imprinted into the things that you are surrounded by When you look at them, how is it impacting you? What is it saying to you? Collected books. If you have an old collection of books that you love because you love the author, or really neat travel finds, inherited furniture, which reminds you of somebody that you love, meaningful art, handmade pieces, objects that are tied to memory. When things are collected, they're deeply personal to you, and it impacts how you feel in the space. It impacts how you speak about the space to others. And even when people come into your home, they get a glimpse of what you love, who you are. And like I mentioned earlier, place matters too, where in the world you are. So if you live in the country, maybe your lifestyle naturally shapes your interiors differently. If you live in a city, what do you see when you look out your window? Is there any architecture that surrounds you? What pace of life is happening outside your window? So there's permanence in connecting to a place as well. The rooms people remember most are rarely the most perfect. They are the rooms that are most felt. So maybe timeless interiors aren't about creating a home untouched by time. Maybe they're about creating a home that becomes more beautiful because of time. A home that carries evidence of living, of choices that are made thoughtfully, of stories that are collected, of quality that's lasted, of rooms that evolved instead of being erased. The perfect mix of the past and the present. What was and what is still to come. Because ultimately, timelessness is not about perfection. It's about permanence, connection, and meaning. And if our homes truly shape how we think, feel, function, and live, then creating spaces with more depth and staying power matters. Not because we need a perfect home, but because we deserve homes that support who we are becoming. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share it with someone who loves design. And if you'd like to go deeper into creating a home that supports better living, you can find everything over at yourparo.com. That's yourparo.com. Thank you for listening.